Uh, Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, I believe, from coast to coast at this point. I'm Jennifer Novak, as noted, I'm the Executive Director of the Opioid Response Team, and I'm coming to you from Val-des-Monts, Quebec, which is the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So really pleased to be here today, hopefully chatting with all of you and hopefully answering as many questions as I can. So but before we dive into that, I'd like to just do a little kind of go back down memory lane, if we can call it that, and just kind of chat about where we've kind of started here at Health Canada, and then where we currently are and where we want to be going. And so, as per the introduction, Maria has been part of the Canadian Pain Task Force, and that is, quite the substantial body of work that came to be. It didn't happen by accident. It was probably, Maria and others would probably argue, decades and decades worth of advocacy that came before that. And so I don't want to minimize any of those efforts. It's actually that excellent body of work and advocacy that led to the creation of the Pain Task Force and the actual importance and ministerial involvement in seeing how chronic pain is managed in this country, looking at best practices and really kind of setting a path towards the future. And so although it may have started out of some of the work that we were doing to look at the opioid overdose crisis, I think we soon realized in 2018 that some of the interventions that we had begun to take to address the opioid overdose crisis were having, in some cases, devastating consequences for people living with chronic pain. And we need to course correct. And so, when we started this group in 2019, then I think it was really important for us to put at the table federal, provincial, territorial parties, people from the research community, people living with chronic pain, and really looking at a really vast view of how chronic pain is managed, but really looking at many health professional groups and others to really draw a path for the future. So that's kind of where we started. If we go on to the next slide, we had our 3 reports that came out of it. So that first one was really, what is the current state? What is happening across the country? It's really hard to set a path for the future when we don't have an understanding of where you are. And I think that first report really set a solid foundation about where we wanted to go. My favorite report was the second report, in that it was highlighting some of the exceptional best practices across the country and telling us that we actually know what we need to do. What it highlighted for us is that we don't have it on a scale meaningful enough to meet the needs of Canadians. And so it wasn't like we were starting with a blank page. We actually knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to see those best practices, and we were trying to utilize that second report a bit as a beacon, a little lighthouse on all of these amazing bodies of work across the country. And showing how you could scale some of these up and really inform best practices in all our jurisdictions, so that irregardless of your postal code, you should have access to a certain level of care when it comes to your chronic pain. And so what did that mean? That led us to this kind of third report, which was, so what? Where do we go from here? And Fiona and Maria, the 2 co-chairs of the task force, and I have laughed a little bit, and ministers have laughed with them as well about what showed up in that report, which was 150 recommendations. It's like, well, when you have 150 recommendations, do you have a goal? And I think what you see on slide 5 is that there's a method to the madness, right? There's 150 recommendations. They may not all be at the same level, but there are themes there. And those overarching goals, what we want to anchor our kind of forward direction on, is the 6 that you see on screen: enabling, coordination, collaboration, and leadership across the country. To my point about, understanding we have these best practices, we just need champions across the country, able and willing to move these ideas across. Improve access to timely, equitable, person-centered pain care. That's understanding that your postal code really shouldn't matter. And if we know what we need to do, how can we get those in every corner of the country? And increasing awareness and education and training. We have an understanding that, sometimes with that lack of awareness and education comes stigma. And we can course correct that with a little bit of knowledge. Doesn't take too much usually to convince people otherwise, once you show them the full body of evidence that we have, which leads to your body of evidence. You need that research, you need that infrastructure continuing to self-reinforce itself so we can keep advancing our interventions. And at the same time, we want to monitor and look at those health system quality pieces, just because pain is not going to be its own independent piece. It has to fit in this broader system. And so finding those opportunities where we can leverage efforts being made in the entire health system helps improve conditions for people living with pain. And that last piece is really about equity. The last few years have really, in the pandemic, kind of shine a light on what many of us knew already before, was that lack of equity in that healthcare system. It's not everybody's getting the same level of service at the time that they need it. So how can we rectify that and balance that? And so when you look at slide 6, I know it's little tiny words here, but what it's meant to reflect is really that we can't do this alone. I think the title of today's presentation is the best representation. When I heard it from Maria, the other, I was like, yeah, I'm like that is it, like top down, bottom up. That's exactly it. And everywhere in between. And that's what this slide is, because you can play with regulations, you can play with the leadership at the federal level, the provincial level, municipal level, but then that advocacy work coming in through research, through people with lived and living experience, through healthcare, all of these come together to create a whole and to create a comprehensive response. And so this slide really is there to show how we can all contribute in one way or another to the improvement across the country. So the next slide is where I come in, that kind of top down, like in the title, is the federal responsibilities. And, I have to thank the co-chairs of both the task force, but then also all the members coming in through the task force and the external panel, playing stakeholders. Like I said, for many of you, it's probably been decades in the making for your ongoing advocacy. But what we have now with those 3 reports is a body of work that we can keep referring back to. And we've taken that seriously at the federal level, and we've worked with all of our peers here in multiple departments to see how they can organize themselves, nudge and adjust some of their policies, practices, investments to better support interventions in chronic pain. But I don't want to minimize the fact that task force and that working group had to do so in pretty challenging times. And I don't know if many of you have, taken note of what has actually transpired in the last 3 years, but that work had to deal with 2 federal elections. I think we're at 3 ministers now, in Minister Pitsipat-Taylor, who kind of set this off, Minister Haidu through the pandemic, and now Minister Duclos and Minister Bennett. And then, sprinkle in a little global pandemic, amongst that. But even more so was an accelerated mandate, an expanded mandate. And, all along here at the federal level, we've been trying to keep track of that. And we wanted to make sure that what came after It didn't end with that final report. And what we wanted to do with our peers here is really develop a proper action plan, something that truly does a so what now. And we have a concrete kind of roadmap for where we want to go. And that requires the buy-in and all of our peers across the federal family internalizing and understanding how they can be of service. And so on slide 8, you begin to see how each kind of department began to internalize that, began to adjust and course correct some of their work to really bring forward what we want to see in our part of the recommendations are tangible results for many of you. And so that meant, for example, just a tangible example is that last summer, we did a call for proposal in a grants and contribution program called the Substance Use and Addiction Program. You're probably going like, what does Substance Use and Addiction Program have to do with chronic pain? It was a vehicle, okay? The name doesn't matter. It was a pot of money. It was an opportunity that we could leverage to get tangible work happening in chronic pain. And so we made pain one of the eligible expenses. And what we've seen over time is we've been able to support projects, one which is with the Association of Faculties of Medicine to develop a national curriculum in the diagnosis, treatment, and management of pain and addiction medicine. We have the University Health Network to further educate community-based primary healthcare providers in underserved and remote regions of Canada. Back to my point about your postal code. And then we have, investments with, the Alberta College of Family Physicians to really develop a mentorship program for family physicians and primary care professionals to really kind of expand their expertise in how they address chronic pain. And so we try to leverage opportunities that we see, but the only way we can do that is by knowing and internalizing the needs and the challenges that were either raised in the report or that we continue to hear through advocacy groups and through those that reach out to us, because the landscape is ever changing and is ever evolving. So where do we go from here? These were examples of where we've begun to internalize it. Where are we going next is I think what's exciting for Jean-Francois and I, and hopefully it will be for some of you. If we go on to slide 9, I'm assuming none of you, follow along on all the exciting ministerial announcements happening across the country. So why don't I draw attention to one in particular that happened back in March. The Minister of Health, Minister Duclos, came forward with a one-time $2 billion health transfer to provinces and territories to really address those kind of immediate pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic related healthcare system pressures. At the time, a lot of it was, backlog surgeries and medical procedures and diagnostics and so forth. But he came forward with 5, what we're calling basically fundamental priorities for that $2 billion. And every single one of them is linked to dealing with chronic pain, every single one of them. So backlogs and lack of support for health workers, access to family health services, so that primary care element, long-term care and home care, so better support for seniors and people living with disabilities, mental health and substance use, and really seeing that intersect. And then the last is health data and virtual care. I think one of the bigger advantages we got out of the pandemic is we made some great progress in virtual care, and how can we not lose that progress moving forward and just kind of revert back to our old ways. So moving forward, primary care and virtual care, JF and I have been really working very closely with our peers working on that, because we want to increase the capacity for primary care providers, but that really starts by understanding how they can actually be of service for their patients. If chronic pain is one of the main reasons people seek out primary care, well, maybe we should start there. And what services can we offer? And I mentioned earlier, you're not going to solve all of these things by, our grants and contributions, but there's a way to set a foundation there. And then we have opportunities to amplify those guidelines or mentorship programs or whatnot on a larger scale. How do we ramp those up? And so we really want to start with our primary care, but understanding that it goes beyond your primary care physician. So how can we be of service for expanding that health human resources? Delayed surgeries, diagnostic. I'm actually personally one of them. I was given a surgery date 4 years into the future, and I was like, wonderful. I'll see where I'm at in 4 years from now and what my current condition is in 4 years from now. I'll have my people call your people. But we have to do better with our health system, and we have to support the healthcare workers that are probably burnt out up until this point from the pandemic. The next slide, what you see is that link for some to mental health and substance use. It's not for all, but there's definitely some links there. Chronic pain can be in some cases a driver and a result of chronic pain. It goes both ways. The same thing for substance use. And so how can we better support efforts that are being made to improve mental health supports across the country, and same thing for substance use? And I haven't, dived in, but you can see we flagged on each of the slides where these priorities link directly into those task force recommendations. And so on slide 11, I noted on long-term care, but I want to spend a little bit more time end-of-life care and frankly, medical assistance in dying. As JF and I were, doing our rounds with our peers to help have our peers internalize and understand what was coming out of the reports and where we could find commonalities. One of the staggering stats that I found was that over 55% of patients who requested medical assistance in dying cited inadequate control of pain or concerns about their pain as a reason for seeking out medical assistance in dying in 2020. That's like shocking. And that is, in some cases, probably a failure of our health system to connect people to appropriate care. And so how can we do better in that front? And so, JF and I, really working with our peers, and through, there was funding in Budget 2021, which was a small piece to go to the Canadian Association of MAID assessors and providers to really develop a MAID curriculum. But that MAID curriculum also needs to be aware of what's happening in the pain space so that they can redirect if need be. And so I want you all to know that we understand the importance of those chronic pain considerations. If that's your biggest group, more than half are coming in with issues of chronic pain, let's start there. Let's start there and see what we can do to support and adjust our practices moving forward. The next slide is, impacts of COVID. I shared just a personal experience. Those delayed surgeries, long COVID, that has impacts on people's quality of life. So can we leverage this pandemic and all that we've learned to really be, a mobilizing time to get the supports and funds to really adjust and course correct and move our healthcare system forward? And right off the top, I mentioned, the importance of research and surveillance. This is what helped us with our second report. That second report was all about all of those best practices. There are great things that have happened in the 2 years that we wrote that report. It's important to continue to refresh that. And as we get more information, or as we get more specific in what helps in certain circumstances, or what could be second line treatment or third line treatment or fourth line treatment as these things go, to help provide people with a toolkit. I had a former boss that used to joke all the time, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's not super helpful, but if you can get more tools in that toolkit for these health professionals, for patients, in order to be able to access, a buffet of options, so that one works in certain circumstances, that you have a backup plan and a backup plan to the backup plan. And so really where you land is, how do we take that information and mobilize? And so you end up on slide 13 with labor. How do you keep people hopefully out of disability and into the market, or the opposite? When is one more appropriate for each individual circumstance? And that will be an individual circumstance. And so we have to be able to support people living with chronic pain and adjust our policies to meet people where they're at. And so that brings you to our last slide here on slide 14, which is about equity. Exactly what we've just been talking about up until this point is really understanding the prevalence of chronic pain is not equitable. And so chronic pain doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anybody at this point. And so how can we take trauma-informed, approaches to supporting individuals through their access to health services and programs? And so to reassure all of you, if that's of reassurance, we made a specific decision to create a new chronic pain policy team. And so on slide 15, it's to let you all know that there's a focal point for all of you to reach out to within the federal family, and that's JF and I. And we're here to do the dot connecting with all of the different health priority areas as they're scattered all across the entire federal family. And you can come to us, and there's no wrong door. We will find the right place to go and figure out who makes the most sense in the federal family to address those needs. But that advocacy can come through us. That helps inform our advice and our recommendations to our peers across the federal family, but it gives you that focal point moving forward. So that's the top-down part in having a direct and central link and a no wrong door. But happy to report, and this is, I think, the best segue for that I could do for Maria, which is that focal point from the bottom up. So with that, maybe I will turn it over to you, Maria.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. I am so grateful to just see, when we were working on the task force, there were so many questions about, is this really going to make a difference? And will there really be tangible improvements and tangible change for people who live with pain? And it's great to see, even we're a year out now from May 2021, and to see things like, $18 million in initial funding going to pain-related projects. I think for many of us, when that funding under the Substance Use and Addictions Program became available, and for the first time, we saw on that application form, priority populations, people who live with chronic pain. That was a game changer for so many people, just that recognition as well as the resources. So thanks for sharing, what has happened so far from the top down. I'm going to talk a bit about the launch of Pain Canada and that bottom up piece. So Pain Canada is a new multi-stakeholder initiative supported by Pain BC, and this is really meant to be a national action network and a platform for the gathering of diverse people who are active on the issues of chronic pain, diverse perspectives and interests. and really a way to continue to advocate, to continue to push, but also to continue to do the things that are best done in community. We know that regulatory, legislative, policy change, resources, health accords, all of these top-down things are really important. But what we're talking about is not just regulatory and legislative change. We're talking about attitudinal change, social change, empowering people who live with pain. Really, a lot of that stuff that is best done through bottom-up strategies. And this is a way to do that and start to build the kind of infrastructure that you see for other chronic conditions. If you look at mental health, for example, or you look at arthritis or cancer or diabetes, most of these conditions have significant number of charitable organizations, not-for-profit organizations that are working to raise money, to build programs, to link with research. In pain, we're just at the very beginning of that journey, and Pain Canada is going to be one of the vehicles to do that. So really, what are we trying to do? We're trying to create opportunities for action. Oftentimes people want to get engaged. They don't know how to, they don't know what to do, what's the way to become involved, and Pain Canada will be an umbrella. We want to build capacity to transform pain. We want to mobilize both people, but also financial resources. Again, thinking back to all of those other charitable organizations that exist on other chronic conditions, they're able to tap into corporate sponsorships, to philanthropic giving. That equates to hundreds of millions of dollars going to those causes. And without that kind of infrastructure for pain, we're just not able to access that support and build out that change that we want to see. Again, we want to provide a springboard by which people can get involved, and not just in health. We know there are issues for people who live with chronic pain in the justice system, among veterans, issues that need to be solved through partnership with educational institutions, issues related to employment. So this is really based a little bit on the Pain BC model, which has been a big tent coalition providing a springboard for action. So some folks have said, well, what is this thing? Is this a new organization? Is it its own charity? So I just want to speak a little bit about that. When we were thinking about ways to expand the reach of things that are happening across the country, Jen, you spoke about that second report where all of these sort of little nodes of excellence or sparks of great innovative things that were going on. Just knowing that part of what needs to happen is those things need to be scaled and spread and customized to different environments. And we thought, well, what's the best way to do that? What's the most efficient way to just get going? We did a consultation with leaders of other charitable organizations across the country. We talked to everybody from, the big health charities to groups that are really coalitions of much smaller sort of networks or groups of people who live with particular conditions. What all these folks said to us is, don't start by creating a big bureaucracy. Don't make a national charity with provincial chapters, with multiple boards of directors and multiple offices. Pain BC has been very effective as a nimble, primarily virtual organization. Stick with that model and just formalize that work. We have so many partnerships. Formalize it, bring people together, create a national advisory structure, which we have done, and just get going. So one of the things that we're doing is using Pain BC's existing infrastructure. So we're incorporated as an organization. We have a board of directors, staff, charitable registration, lots of systems that we've been able to build. And instead of replicating all of that under another organization, Pain BC is really just loaning all of that infrastructure to the Pain Canada initiative. So we do have an advisory committee made up of people with lived experience, researchers, clinical leaders from across the country. Many of them represent organizations working in the pain space, initiatives in the pain space, or networks in the pain space. So as an example, Keith Meldrum, a former member of the Pain BC Board of Directors, but now one of the principal architects for the International Association for the Study of Pain, their global patient advocacy effort called GAPA. So he sits at this table. Folks from the Pain Society of Alberta, Sask Pain, the Canadian Pain Society, Solutions for Kids in Pain Network, the Alberta Health Services. So they have a provincial strategy. They're at the table. There's a formal liaison person back to the Pain BC Board of Directors. There's representatives from the Ontario Chronic Pain Network, from the CAHR funded research network. That's also called the Chronic Pain Network, from the Center of Excellence for Chronic Pain in Veterans, from a youth-focused chronic pain organization called Take a Pain Check. Our partners in Quebec, the Quebec Pain Research Network and AQDC, which is a really strong mobilized group of people with lived experience. We have Indigenous representation. We have representation from Atlantic Canada, both the Atlantic Mentorship Network for Pain and Addictions and the People in Pain Network. So these are some of the faces that sit at this table, participate in Pain Canada, advise Pain Canada, and really partner with us to bring the National Action Plan to life. So a little bit about the visual identity of Pain Canada. So we thought long and hard about, what is a visual identity that people will find relatable, that sort of connects to all of the things that we want this to be. And we settled on the fallen leaf, which is really an image both of the broken efforts. We've been working, as Jen said, we've been working on this for a few decades to try and get to this point. But also the disrupted lives. Pain has resulted in just so many losses for people who live with pain and their families, for communities. And this is really the representation here. What it also symbolizes is that opportunity to come together. So knitting together these shards into this new movement and this new effort moving forward. The logo for Pain Canada was developed by a person who lives with pain himself, and that really informed this look. So a little bit about, what is Pain Canada going to offer to people who live with pain and others across the country? So there are many things. We launched Pain Canada at the beginning of May, and already there are tangible things we are putting in the hands of people who live with pain and others. So for people who live with pain, Live Plan B Plus. This is an online pain self-management program built by and for people with lived experience. There were over 500 people with lived experience involved in the development of this program. And that's something where people can access videos, they can take a self-assessment, they can get recommendations of things that will help them with their specific challenges, learning about pain and hearing the stories of others and what worked for them. So that's available currently to anyone in the world. We're working with several researchers across the country to integrate additional resources into that. So Live Plan B Plus is primarily a self-management education tool, but we are building in virtual therapeutic support. So like online CBT and other things that will be available later in the year. Our Making Sense of Pain program. This is a Pain BC program that was developed and trialed here in BC, and it's now running in many different environments, from addiction treatment programs to primary care settings, community centers, recreational facilities. This is a program where we train people to deliver this, and they pull together a small group of people with lived experience of pain and run this program on a weekly basis. We now are working towards culturally tailoring and translating this. So by 2023, it'll be available in multiple languages, but already this year, we plan to make it available to a number of different sites across Canada, not just in BC. We're bringing together partners that are working on peer support, looking at shared processes, shared training. How can we support the expansion of peer support programming? We are working with researchers, policymakers, and others, bringing together the start of a new network. So this is a movement of people who live with pain, who want to be involved in advocacy. They want to inform research. They want to partner on research. They want to partner on publishing. They want to speak to the media. This is going to be a network that we're launching in the fall. So stay tuned if you're keen to be involved, or sign up on the Pain Canada website to be informed when we go live with that. There are already some educational offerings on Pain Canada for clinicians. This was something that is going to grow over time with more and more resources to help enable better care for people who live with pain. We're doing all kinds of things to support this broad group of organizations that exist for pain. Again, we want to grow that. So we're supporting organizations with fundraising, helping them with governance training. In some cases, like in Ontario, there is no provincial association for pain the way there is here in BC or even in Alberta or Saskatchewan. So there are lots of active conversations there about, well, what could that look like? And would that help move things in Ontario? So that's the kind of capacity building that Pain Canada is doing. We're continuing to do our coordination of awareness and stigma reducing campaigns. Just as an indication, last year, we supported a whole range of organizations and individuals. We had over 500 people and organizations involved in the Pain Awareness Week campaign, and we had reach with 2 campaigns in 2021 of almost 3 million people. So this is harnessing that power of the collective and getting all of those groups, whether it's an MS association, an arthritis association, an anti-poverty organization, or building trades, for example, where pain is a really big problem, getting them to share these messages and mobilize their own communities. Lastly, really trying to give voice to advocates, many of whom are people with lived and living experience. We are hosting the first ever conference by and for people with lived experience. There's already a national steering committee that's working to develop the program for that. It'll be a free event. It'll be online during National Pain Awareness Week in November. Over a period of 3 days. And I think that's going to be a great launching pad for people to get further engaged and continue to amplify around the voices and needs of people who live with pain. So we're going to stop there. We wanted to leave 15 minutes for questions. I think we're right on time. So these are the contact information, both for JF and Jen in the chronic pain policy team at Health Canada. And most people know how to find me through Pain BC or through Pain Canada, which is really a multilingual. I mean, we call it Pain Canada as we're speaking in English, but douleur-canada.ca is the French version. And over time, all of these resources will be available in French as well. So I'm thrilled to be able to be sponsoring Pain Canada through our Pain BC infrastructure, knowing that it could change over time. But this is really a way to continue the momentum that the Canadian Pain Task Force offered and grow this effort in this bottom-up way. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I see that there are some questions. So Ari, I will turn it back to you to take us through this next piece.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that very educational presentation. I learned a lot, even as someone who has been a little bit closer to this work. So appreciate it. Okay, so yes, we do have some great questions coming in. This first part, I think this is related, so I'll kind of combine it. So someone asks, such an exciting presentation and set of initiatives. Thank you for all for leading this process. Question regarding Pain Canada. Will this also serve as a forum for facilitating meaningful connections between researchers and people living with pain? I think you mentioned something about research, right?
Absolutely. So we actually are embarking on the creation of this network of people with lived experience that researchers can tap into as patient partners on projects, as collaborators, as even just help recruiting for studies, and also mobilizing knowledge that's generated through research that needs to get into the hands of people with lived experience. So we're just in the process of creating a role description, hiring an engagement lead for that, and then there will be this network that gets developed over time.
Awesome. And how can people get involved?
At this point, we're still in this growth stage, so the best way to get connected is to go to the Pain Canada website and just sign up for news from that website, or follow us on Twitter or Facebook, and that's a way to be informed once the network goes live. So we're just in the building phase, but I'm thinking that by fall, hopefully September, October, we'll get there. There is an existing sort of sub-network of people with lived experience that are engaged in research on pain, but it's quite small, and the goal is to significantly increase that.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, and a question for the folks from Health Canada. So someone is asking about long COVID and chronic pain. And I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but maybe if you can just speak to some of the qualifications around disability. They're saying that for those like myself that by today's regulations and rules fall through the cracks of living without financial support because they are considered, quote, not disabled enough. Are you able to speak to that?
I am, yeah. So that's a great question, and I think it ties in exactly to why we needed a focal point team through the chronic pain team here at Health Canada. Right? There's one of the foundational pieces, whether we were doing that for the opioid response, the overdose crisis response, or in this circumstance, is the involvement of people with lived and living experience. We didn't do that right off the bat. I alluded to that when we spoke about the response to the overdose crisis back in 2016, and that had consequences for people living with chronic pain. Our colleagues at Employment and Social Development in Canada, they're finalizing a disability action plan. It's part of those ministers' mandate commitments. And we will want to connect with them and make sure that you have that engagement with people with lived and living experience with chronic pain to see, does this meet their needs? Can we shape and adjust? We have, like I said, what's always nice is when you have a body of work like the reports, we get to say, it's not just me, Jen Novak, saying that you should do this. Like, here's like 87 pages of references from these reports. We have the body of work to kind of turn back to. And so if there are certain elements like what is being raised here, like long COVID or other issues that aren't part of the eligible expenses, because I think that the comment was like, not disabled enough. Ugh. Like, how can we frame and adjust that? And I think part of it is exactly that, pointing to the body of work, but sometimes it's just shining a light on it and saying, well, did you consider the following? Have you engaged people with, and we can facilitate that. And with Maria, with Pain Canada, we can funnel people towards Pain Canada and say, Pain Canada can bring that focal point of advocacy and also feed into, in this case, the disability action plan. And so it's by working together and playing within the systems that we are able to get that meaningful change. And I think we have a critical opportunity here with the disability action plan to get that. It's a priority for that minister. I can tell you, if it's in the mandate letter, the ministers really have a bit of a nudge to get these things done because it's in their mandate letter. So when we show up and we're like, let me help you here, how you can actually deliver on these things. It gives us, it opens a crack in the window for us to kind of walk through, and then we can kind of turn back to the body of work and organizations now like Pain Canada to really kind of shepherd that forward. I don't know, JF or Maria, if you wanted to jump in on that as well. No, okay.
I think you nailed it, Jen. It's really part of the awareness function of the chronic pain policy team that we need to do with our federal colleagues. I think yeah.
Thank you. So another question about some of the federal work. Someone is asking, is the federal government planning any transfer payments to the provinces to support this work?
Yes, exactly that. And so I alluded to an announcement by Minister Duclos back in March. I'm happy to put in the chat the link to it in the announcement, but right now it's an investment of $2 billion to go towards these additional supports. Now that's in addition to bilateral agreements that already exist that have funds going to mental health and addiction and to long-term care. And it's in addition to just the regular Canada Health transfer as well. So that's a top up to realizing and understanding where we are right now. Our health system is kind of screaming for some additional supports, and that's what that additional $2 billion is set to do, is to do that quick influx. But I'll put it in I'll put the link in the chat.
I think, Ari, can I just say one thing about that? Because I think this was a big discussion we had in the work of the task force is, you know, are we waiting for a giant pot of money that says chronic pain on it? Well, of course we are, but we're also being realistic in a pandemic. You know, we're going to use the opportunities that we can. And when you talk to people who live with pain, so many people tell you, I don't have a family doctor. I can't get my opioids prescribed because my family doctor retired or moved away. I'm waiting for surgery. Like a lot of the investments that Jen is speaking about that are across the system are going to have significant benefits for people who live with pain, even though this money didn't have a big label on it that says chronic pain money. We're, of course, looking for every resource we can pull on that's going to go back to some of those recommendations in the action plan. And many of them are outside of pain. I mean, some of them are in the substance use program. Some of them are in the policy space. Some of them are in the regulatory space. But we are looking at that. We're looking at it from the bottom-up standpoint, but having people inside government that are tasked to do that, like JF, like Jen, is so significant because there are things that you just can't see when you're not in the hallowed halls in Ottawa. So I think, Jen, just to speak to that, because some folks are like, well, it doesn't say pain on it, so how can that be for pain? And I think what we've really learned is there's so many other opportunities that will have benefit for our constituency.
And that's exactly right. I mean, when it's, especially in the federal government, we're very rarely looking for individual kind of narrow investments. We're trying to see these broader investments. And to the point about those 5 priorities, chronic pain is in every one of them. So any improvement you see along that continuum of those 5 priorities helps to advance priorities for those with chronic pain. It's any improvement in primary care will help. Any improvement in virtual care will help. So we part of it is being able to tie in, and maybe we, and this is where JF and I have to do a little bit more work, is just adding in the word, chronic pain to those that are being supported. But we're really trying to look at it from a holistic systems piece, so that all those dollars actually benefit many of us. Yeah. And just so you know, to Sandy, I've just put the link to that $2 billion investment in the Q&A section there for you.
All right. And I think we have time for one more question, if that's all right. So this one is great to see this one from the education perspective. So someone asks, you mentioned changes to healthcare education curriculum. Any idea on the timeline for this? Is this for new healthcare providers? And how will information be provided to current ones, as one of the issues is the outdated best practices, treatment, language, etc., that flows from healthcare providers to the general public?
So, and another actually fabulous question, and I think this is the perfect example of that top down, bottom up that this whole day is kind of titled against. And we will have provided some funding for improving curriculums, for guideline development. We have two ministers, one for mental health and addiction and one for pain, that connect with health providers, and we're able to kind of draw attention to these different guidelines. If we talk, for example, ministers will have bilateral agreements with College of Family Physicians, for example. Well, in our remarks that we support ministers on, we can draw attention to these pieces so that these colleges and broader groups can take up some of that curriculum. But we can inform and nudge and influence where an organization like Pain Canada can come in, is also at the same time champion these things and saying, see that, like, we actually want that on a larger scale. So back to my point that I was saying earlier, it's not that we don't know what needs to be done, it's just not on a scale that gets us to the outcomes that we want. So how can we all work together to draw attention to good work and good curriculums? We're working with universities and schools of medicine, but pain, I don't know how many hours they spend in their entire training. It may not be enough, right? And so we want to start with students, but it has to be multiple touch points across a person's career to really help them out. So how do we have those touch points with the right stakeholders, with the right people? And it's not just coming from Jen Novak saying, hey, you should look at this one curriculum. It's by all of us drawing attention to that good work. But I think maybe I can segue to Maria. That's why it's important to have this kind of no wrong door, whether that's with JF and I, or no wrong door, whether that's with Maria and Pain Canada.
Yeah, absolutely, Jen. And I think, the curriculum that's being developed for all 17 medical schools across the country, that's going to reach some of those folks that are in training. But if you look at Pain BC as an example, if you go to our website and look on our healthcare provider education page, we are doing so much, and this is going to help spread across the country. Monthly webinars, mentorship networks, the ECHO program, so monthly shared learning and case sort of learning for interdisciplinary groups of healthcare providers. That kind of thing is spreading across the country. And there are more and more healthcare providers that are almost becoming subspecialists in chronic pain within their discipline, because they're taking more and more and more of these courses. And they're developing incredible communities of clinicians that are excited about treating people with chronic pain. They want to be engaged in this work. So I think there's, med school curriculum, but there's all these other things we need to do to create that ongoing mentorship support and reinforcement of these changes that we're trying to see. I know probably Ari's watching the time as we're just at the hour. So I'm available to answer additional questions. Maybe send them to the education@painbc.ca email, and they'll get routed to me or another person at Pain BC or Pain Canada if they're more appropriate. I want to thank Jen and JF, who've been such incredible partners in the federal government, already just on speed dial for people in the pain community that want help navigating, that want questions answered around big government questions. So just, I think, the start of a new era for chronic pain in Canada. Back to you, Ari.
Thank you all so much for this excellent presentation. We're getting tons of praise and thankful comments in the chat. So everyone seemed to really enjoy it and be just kind of blown away by the work that you all have done and been a part of. So thank you again, everyone, for participating. I hope you will take a moment to complete our feedback survey. You can let us know what you thought of today's talk, as well as suggest topics for future presentations. So that should only take a moment. And like I said, we'll be sending out the link to the recording shortly. But yes, thank you again for spending your lunch hour with us, and have a great rest of your day.